Hey kids, this week we are learning that God puts us where we need to be. Sometimes that might be a place where we want to be, but other times God might put us in a place where we don't want to be because He has an important job for us there. We've been learning that God's people, also known as the Jewish people, had been forced to leave Israel and live far away. This was called the exile. Then we learned about Ezra and Nehemiah, and that the people had started returning to the land of Israel, and they had started to rebuild. But although some of the people had started to return, there were a lot of God's people who still lived far away. This week we are going to learn about a young woman named Esther. She was Jewish, one of God's people, but she lived in Persia. For our activity this week, you'll need a piece of paper and something to draw with. The king of Persia was named Xerxes. King Xerxes was known to have a pretty bad temper. History tells us that this same King Xerxes once had a big bridge built to be able to take his army to invade another kingdom. But before they could use the bridge, a huge storm came and knocked it down. Xerxes got so mad that he had the engineers who built the bridge beheaded. And then he had someone whip the river 300 times to punish the river for knocking down his bridge. So yeah, a bit of a bad temper. One day, King Xerxes was throwing a big party and wanted to show off his very beautiful wife, Queen Vashti. But Queen Vashti told the king no. She refused to come out. So King Xerxes had Vashti kicked out of the palace. King Xerxes decided to find a new wife. He set up something a bit like a beauty contest to pick a wife. He had all the beautiful, young, unmarried women taken and brought to the king's palace. King Xerxes ended up choosing Esther, and Esther became the new queen. Being queen sounds pretty awesome, but I don't know how much Esther would have liked the idea of being forced to marry the king. Esther was Jewish, one of God's people. She would not have been happy about marrying someone that didn't love God. But even though she may not have liked where she was going to find out that God puts us where we need to be. God had a reason for Esther to be queen. Esther had been raised by her older cousin named Mordecai. Mordecai warned Esther not to tell the king or anyone else that she was Jewish. She obeyed and kept it a secret. On your piece of paper, let's draw a line down the middle, the long way. And then we'll draw two lines the other way. Like this, to make 6 boxes. Now go ahead and draw a crown for Queen Esther in the first box. So King Xerxes put a royal crown on Esther's head, and he made her queen in place of Vashti. One day, Mordecai, Esther's older cousin, was near the 2 officers who guarded the door to the palace. Mordecai heard these 2 officers plotting to kill the king. He was able to warn the king and save his life. Yay, Mordecai! God had put Mordecai where he needed to be to overhear the plan and save the king. But not everyone liked Mordecai. A man named Haman worked for the king. He was very important and liked to make sure that everyone remembered that he was very important. He wanted everyone to bow down and kneel for him. And everyone did. Everyone except Mordecai. But Mordecai would not bow down, and he did not kneel. This made Haman very angry. Haman was so angry, he wanted to kill Mordecai. Haman was so angry that even that didn't seem like enough. He wanted to kill all of Mordecai's people, too. He knew that Mordecai was Jewish, so Haman made a plan to have all the Jewish people killed. Haman told the king, "There are a bunch of really bad people that live in your kingdom, and they are causing trouble. We should have them all killed." Haman convinced the king to let him set a date to have all the Jewish people killed. Haman rolled the dice to pick what date he would choose. Can you draw some dice on your paper? Let's draw them in the second box. Now Mordecai heard about all that had been done. To show how upset he was, he tore his clothes. Then he put on rough cloth and ashes, and he went out into the city, crying loudly and very sadly. Mordecai cried. The other Jews cried. They were all very sad. Eventually, Esther finds out what is going on. Mordecai asks Esther to beg the king to rescue the Jewish people. But it wasn't that easy. No one was allowed to go to the king without being called. Anyone who enters without being called must be put to death unless the king holds out his golden scepter to them. And remember, no one knew that Esther was Jewish, not the king and not Haman. If Esther kept quiet, she might be fine, but the rest of her people would be killed. Mordecai said to Esther, "It could be that you were made queen for a time like this." Mordecai realized that Esther had been made queen at just the right time to be able to rescue God's people. Esther agreed to go before the king, but first she asked Mordecai to ask all of God's people in her city to fast for 3 days. That means to give up eating and spend that time praying and asking God for help. Can you draw something you really like to eat in the next box? I really like candy, so I'm going to draw candy. And now, draw a big X over it. Would you be willing to give up candy or desserts for 3 days and spend extra time praying instead? Esther, Mordecai, and all God's people in their city weren't going to eat at all for 3 days. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I die, I die. After 3 days, Esther bravely went before King Xerxes. This was it. Would Esther die? Or would the king hold out his gold scepter and let her live? He held out his scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What do you want to ask me? I will give you as much as half of my kingdom." Esther invited King Xerxes and the evil Haman to come to a dinner party. Yep, a dinner party. The king agreed. Can you draw a table with food on it in the next box? Add your chicken and green beans. As they finished dinner, the king asked again, "Now, Esther, what are you asking for? I will give it to you. What is it you want?" So Esther responded and invited King Xerxes and Haman to another dinner party tomorrow. That night, a couple of things happened. Haman was feeling pretty special that he had been invited to the queen's dinner party. But then he saw Mordecai sitting at the gate. Mordecai still refused to honor and bow to Haman. Haman was so mad, he asked his friends what he should do. His friends gave him some really bad advice. They told him that he should ask the king to have Mordecai killed tomorrow morning. None of Haman's friends told him that hatred was wrong, or to be thankful for everything he had, or how important it is to forgive. The Bible teaches us to choose friends who will encourage us to do the right thing and listen to God. Do you have any friends or family members that encourage you to do the right thing, even when it isn't what you want to hear? Shout out the name of some friends or family members that you have who help you do the right thing. Those are the kind of friends we want to find. And that's also the kind of friend we want to be. Have you ever encouraged someone to do the right thing? Well, Haman listened to his friend's really bad advice, and he got to work making all the preparations to have Mordecai killed in the morning. But something else was happening at the same time. King Xerxes could not sleep. What do you do when you can't get to sleep? Well, King Xerxes had someone read to him. Not a storybook, though. He had someone read him the official records of all that had happened under his rule. They read about the time that Mordecai had saved the king from being killed. King Xerxes asked, "Did we ever do anything to reward Mordecai for saving my life?" They hadn't. Right about this time, Haman arrived, ready to ask the king for permission to have Mordecai killed. But the king asks Haman a question. The king asked him, "What should be done for a man the king wants very much to honor?" Now Haman thought, the king must want to honor me. So he said, "Put one of your royal robes on him and put him on one of your own royal horses. Then have one of your important officials lead him on the horse and announce to everyone, 'This is what is done for the man the king wants very much to honor.'" Haman thought the king was going to have all this done for him. But instead, the king said, "Go quickly, take the robe and the horse, just as you have said, and do all this for Mordecai, the Jew." It was Haman's worst nightmare. He hated Mordecai. He had been ready to have Mordecai killed. But instead, Haman had to walk around the city with Mordecai on the king's royal horse and honor him in front of everyone. Let's add a horse to our drawing. A horse is tricky to draw. Let's see if I can help.
We'll start with drawing an oval for the body. Then we'll do a neck and a head. And we'll give him 4 legs. And 2 ears, an eye, and a mouth. Then we'll give him a tail and a mane. And then let's add a saddle. We'll put a square at the top and a rectangle at the bottom. And there we have it, a horse.
Then it was time for Esther's second dinner party. The king and Haman went to eat with Queen Esther. Can you draw another table with food? Make sure to pick different food this time. This is a fancy dinner party for the king. We can't serve the same food both nights. I made pizza. Then the king asked Esther a third time, What are you asking for? I will give it to you. What is it you want?" And then Esther told him. "Please let me live," she asked, "and please let my people live." She explained that someone had made a plan to have her people destroyed. The king asked, "Who has done such a thing?" "Haman," Esther said. The king was very angry. King Xerxes had Haman killed in the same way that Haman had planned to kill Mordecai. Then King Xerxes let Esther and Mordecai come up with a plan so that the Jewish people would be safe. God put Esther where she needed to be. God puts us where we need to be too. Where has God put you? What places do you go? What people do you see? What can you do for God in the places He has put you? God puts us where we need to be. Sometimes He even puts us places that we don't like or that might make us uncomfortable so that we can do something important for Him. But God doesn't want us in places that will truly hurt us. Even when bad things happen, we can trust that God loves us and will rescue us. In our Bible story, all the Jewish people were in danger, and God didn't want them in danger. He put Esther in the right place to be able to help them. God puts people around us to help us, and God is always with us. Who do you know that you can talk to if you need help or advice, or if you're going through something scary? God puts people in our lives that we can talk to and get advice from, and who can help us. Just like Mordecai was able to be there for Esther and help her know what to do. And no matter what happens, God is with us and at work. God can even use terrible things that happen sometimes to do amazing things. We know that in everything, God works for the good of those who love Him.